Taking responsibility for recording meeting minutes is a powerful business tool that you can take advantage of. In this video, I'm going to share with you 6 tips that I've used over my time as an engineer and a consultant to take excellent meeting minutes that have really helped out with the goals of the project and my organization. My name's Chris, and on this channel, I like to share the sorts of tools, tips, tricks, and other things that I've learned over the years as an engineer and consultant that I can use to help other people communicate better in their workplace. So our first tip is to match the names with the location. So I know this sounds a bit strange, but often I find that when I've sat down in a meeting or that when I've joined a meeting, I don't know everyone in the room. I don't know the names, or I forget the names soon after I've met everyone, or there's just something that I don't remember about all the people involved. So I've found that one trick to really help out here is that, and I always take meeting minutes by hand first, but I'll get to that later on, is to write down at the top of the notebook where everyone is. So if you're in a traditional meeting at a table, then to go around the table and say, okay, well, the first person sits up here, the second person sits over here, the third person, so on and so forth, and map out in your notebook where each person's sitting in the meeting. You can apply the same thing to online meetings, but I found it a little bit different. My favorite trick for online meetings is to look at dark and light. So to think about who appears a bit darker in the picture and who appears a bit lighter. For example, I'm wearing a light shirt today and I have a light background, so I'd be putting myself in the light side. And say you can probably see a little bit in the dark over there. If someone's has the lights off in the meeting, if someone's joined the video call with the lights off, then I might put them in or they're wearing a dark shirt, I might put them in the darker side. That's one quick visual way that I've found to record where people are online, if you're in an online meeting. Though there are other alternatives, such as fixing the positions on the screen for all the different people. It depends on which software you're using. So anyway, the point here is the first tip is to match the names with the location. So make sure to give yourself a visual cue as to who's speaking at which time so that you can write it down. Of course, something like Teams would make that much easier. So anyway, this tip I've used most in traditional meetings. So moving on to our second tip, which is 1 point, 1 actor. For every point in the meeting, assign 1 actor to it or make it for information only. So this is to split up your meeting notes into either actionable points or information items. And each of those actionable points should have 1 actor attached to it. So 1 person who's responsible for that point. So design your meeting minutes, your meeting notes, your meeting minutes per action and per information. So 1 action, 1 person to take care of it. A second action, a second person to take care of it. This avoids, and I'm just about to move into this one as a third tip, but this avoids having big paragraphs of text where it's not clear who's responsible for which. So that does roll nicely into the third point, where use tables to format your meeting minutes. Try to avoid the paragraph style that I've seen quite a few times. So in a traditional paragraph style, you might have the meeting information up here, and then a heading for each of the topics that was discussed, and then what was discussed in there as well. Now, back to the second point, you might have buried in these paragraphs exactly who is responsible for taking an action there. And it can be confusing. If you had 6 different people talk about one topic and there are 6 different actions there, you don't know what to do. If you split that up into 6 different items, for example, if you split that up into the different items and then 1 actor per item, later on, when it comes to check who has done their actions from this meeting, you can just go along and tick off and say, that person has done that person has done that, and the third person has done that, so on and so forth. Much harder to do when you've got a paragraph, much easier in a table. So tip number 2 was to 1 point, 1 actor, and tip number 3 is to use a table format. So tip number 4 is to think about your outcomes, to know what your outcome is before you go into the meeting. So I know this can be a bit of a hard one when you've been suddenly thrown into the meeting and you're told to take meeting minutes, but hopefully because you've been invited, you have an idea of what you want to get out of this meeting. Is there somewhere you want to drive the conversation? Is there some point that you want to get across? Or is there something that you want to be heard on? Is there some input of yours that you think should be valuable in this discussion? So this is an opportunity when you're taking the meeting minutes, when you're taking the meeting notes, to put that out and say to everyone else, this is your outcome. This is what you're going to get. I'll get to this later on, but knowing what you want can then be reflected in the points and notes that you take. And so knowing what you want first before you get into the meeting means that all your minutes and all your notes will align with your perspective and your objective. Of course, record what everyone's talking about, but there are some subtleties in phrasing that you'll find come out from your perspective. I often find this is the case when I'm discussing a problem with a client, trying to help a client solve a problem, and trying to convince them that my solution is the correct one. So I've come in knowing, I've done all my research, and I've come in knowing that yes, this is the solution that's going to help you the most. And of course, they're the client, they're going to challenge me to make sure my solution's robust. And I'm going to say, in the meeting minutes, this is what we discussed, and this is how we agreed it. And that agreement will be based on the research that I did previously and presented to the client. So of course they're going to challenge, and I'll record the challenges down as well. But I'll get to that later on about how we can start phrasing those things to your perspective. But the first is to know what you want to get out of this meeting. So that's tip number 4. Tip number 5 is to write notes and then minutes. So when you sit down in the meeting, pull out your own notebook, I've tried to do a spiral bound notebook here as a picture, but pull out your own notebook and handwrite down I prefer handwriting, but you can type it as well. Handwrite your notes in the notebook, and then later on come to Word and put together a table. I've done another video where I set up a template in Word for taking meeting minutes, so I'll leave a link to that in the description down below, or if you hit subscribe, YouTube will suggest it automatically. But the meeting minutes will come out best. This kind of ties in with our other tips about making sure that there's 1 point per actor, putting in a table format. By taking the notes by hand first, it gives you the opportunity to go away and think about what you want to include in the meeting minutes. So thinking about what sort of outcome you wanted to generate, thinking about who said what or who's responsible for actioning what, because ultimately meeting minutes form this nice record of what was discussed and what actions were taken, what information was presented by and for different people, because this will form an official record of this meeting, this discussion. So I've had some clients who will pay on deliverable of meeting minutes, because that's the record that they're submitting to their seniors or to their stakeholders that reflect the outcome of whatever study we delivered for them. So often I'll find that there's some sort of status report or some sort of study outcome that's recorded in meeting minutes, and that can form part of the evidence when we discuss it later on. It's also a good way for example, I'm the consultant, so it's a good way for our client to take our information and our actions away and then review them in their own time and think about, is that really what we want? So giving the client the opportunity, because sometimes it can be really hard for people to think inside a meeting when they're being bombarded with information. So giving them some thoughtful meeting minutes that are focused with quality content in it can then allow those people to, the more analytical people who don't want to start a fuss in the meeting, it can give quieter people the opportunity to take the meeting minutes away, review what was said, and then provide feedback later on. So that's why I suggest write notes and then minutes. So write your notes by hand and then type them up on the computer later on for distribution and comment by everyone. Like I said, I've got a template linked in the description below. So moving on to tip number 6, and this is the sort of killer tip that might be a bit controversial. So let me know in the comments down below if this isn't your sort of thing, or if you think I'm wrong on this one. But phrase meeting minutes from your perspective. Now, this doesn't mean to write in first person or something like first person on behalf of your organization, but this means to really think about your outcomes when you're writing the meeting minutes or when you're contributing to the meeting minutes, because this works when reviewing as well. So think about, what sort of information did you convey in the meeting, or what sort of questions did you ask? What is your understanding of the actions that other people are going to take? What's your understanding of the information that was presented? Because by writing those meeting minutes first, you get the first shot at defining what goes on, at defining what other people do, and defining how that information was presented. No one has a complete memory of what went on in a meeting, and these meeting minutes can be the best opportunity to reflect that. Now, of course, distribute the minutes for review by everyone else. You don't want to be dictating to others what, what they said and what they understood, but by starting the ball rolling from you about your perspective of what was said and who's doing what, you get the opportunity to then define the situation for others to comment on. And that's quite powerful. I found this one to be just the key to meeting minutes, and this is why I did a whole series of videos on this channel about meeting minutes, because it's just so important when you're a consultant. I come from an engineering consulting background, but it's just so important to write meeting minutes in a way that conveys your point, gets your point across, and can distribute actions to other people. So I'm often in three-party meetings where it's myself and the client and then perhaps some other stakeholder, maybe someone that we're conducting a review on or an audit on. That if I take the meeting minutes, I can make sure actions are assigned to the right party to get the outcomes for our client, the outcomes that our client's looking for. So that's one of the tricks I've learned as a consultant, and probably the most controversial of the tips I've got here, because I know there'll be someone down in the comments that's saying, that's not the right way to do it. You should record exactly what's going on. But especially in this day and age where you can do video recordings, it's a good idea to write the meeting minutes from your perspective and say, look, this is my interpretation. When you do it first, you're just saying that this is my interpretation. Feel free to comment. Feel free to give some feedback, and we can discuss further on. It might seem like a long and drawn out process, but if meetings are important to your organization and your client, like in a consulting or engineering environment, then the meeting minutes are quite valuable. So those are the 6 tips that I like to use that I've learned and like to use when I'm writing meeting minutes, things that I've picked up over the years as an engineer and a consultant. On this channel, I like to share those sorts of tools, tips and tricks that I've learned to help everyone else communicate better at work, to help solve problems at work, and to help make complicated solutions simple. So my name's Chris. Hit subscribe if you're interested in this sort of thing, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video.